The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Lovelock, Nevada trading post, just as the first snowflakes began swirling through the December air. And Victoria Farrow knew before the door even opened that something about this mail-order bride was terribly wrong. He had been leaning against the hitching post for the better part of an hour, watching the storm clouds gather over the distant mountains, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The year was 1882, and winter had come early to Nevada, sweeping down from the north with an unusual ferocity that had caught even the oldest ranchers by surprise. Victoria ran the Broken Spur Ranch just outside of town, a sprawling property he had inherited from his father 3 years prior, when consumption had finally claimed the old man. At 26, he had built a reputation as a fair employer and a skilled cattleman, though his solitary nature had become the subject of much speculation among the townspeople. When he had first placed the advertisement in the Boston newspaper 6 months ago, it had been more out of practical necessity than romantic aspiration. The ranch needed a woman's touch, and he needed someone who could manage the household while he dealt with the endless demands of cattle, horses, and the unforgiving land. He had received 3 responses, but only one had resonated with him. Katherine Holloway had written with intelligence and honesty, describing her work as a seamstress and her desire for a fresh start in the West. Her letters had been neither overly sentimental nor coldly businesslike, striking a balance that suggested a reasonable temperament. They had exchanged correspondence for 4 months before he sent the money for her passage. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Solace who had been running the route for 15 years, climbed down from his perch and opened the passenger door with unusual care. Victoria straightened from his casual stance, his hand instinctively moving to settle his hat more firmly against the rising wind. The snow was falling faster now, fat flakes that promised a serious storm within the hour. A gloved hand emerged from the coach, trembling slightly, and then she stepped down onto the wooden platform. Katherine Holloway wore a deep blue traveling dress that had seen better days, and her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun beneath a simple bonnet. She was smaller than he had imagined, barely reaching his shoulder, with a delicate frame that seemed ill-suited for the harsh realities of ranch life. But it was her face that made Victoria's breath catch in his throat, and his hands curl into fists at his sides. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, the skin around it mottled with shades of purple, blue, and sickly yellow. The bruise extended down her cheekbone, and there was a small cut at the corner of her mouth that had recently stopped bleeding. She held herself with rigid dignity, her chin lifted despite the obvious pain, but her right eye, the color of summer sage, flickered with something between fear and defiance as it met his gaze. Victoria moved forward before he fully registered his own motion. "Who did this to you?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, and she flinched slightly, though she did not step back. Up close, he could see other marks, the shadow of bruising on her throat just visible above her collar, and what looked like finger marks on her wrist where her glove had pulled back slightly. "Mr. Farrow." Her voice was surprisingly steady, though barely above a whisper. It carried the refined accent of educated Boston society, so different from the drawl of Nevada. "I am Katherine Holloway. I apologize for my appearance. I had hoped the journey would allow more time for healing." "The hell with appearances," Victoria said, his eyes sweeping over her again, cataloging injuries with growing anger. "I asked who did this." Sela's had begun unloading her trunk from the back of the coach, but he paused to interject. "Found her like this when we stopped to change horses in Salt Lake City 3 days ago. She had different marks then, fresh ones. The old ones were already starting to yellow, Catherine's hand moved to her throat in an unconscious protective gesture. "My uncle," she said quietly. "My father's brother. When my parents died of scarlet fever last spring, I went to live with him and his wife in their home. The arrangement proved unsuitable." The flat, emotionless way she delivered this information told Victoria more than any dramatic recounting could have. He had seen enough violence in his life, both during the war and in the rough justice of the frontier, to recognize the carefully controlled demeanor of someone who had endured repeated abuse. The bruises were not from a single incident but from systematic cruelty. "He know you were leaving?" Victoria asked. "He was away on business when I departed. His wife helped me pack and gave me money from her own savings. She said it was the least she could do for turning a blind eye for so long." Catherine's good eye filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I have repaid your kindness poorly, Mr. Farrow. I understand if you wish to withdraw your offer of marriage. I have enough money to pay for a room at the boarding house until I can secure employment." Victoria looked at this small, battered woman who was trying so hard to maintain her composure and felt something shift in his chest. He had expected a practical arrangement, a business partnership of sorts. What he had gotten was something else entirely, something that called to every protective instinct he possessed. "You are not going to any boarding house," he said firmly. He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The coat engulfed her small frame, but he could see the tension in her shoulders ease slightly at its warmth. "No one hurts you again. You understand me? No one. You are under my protection now." The words came out like a vow, and he meant them with every fiber of his being. He saw her eye widen slightly, searching his face for signs of deception or cruelty, finding neither. "I do not expect you to marry me out of pity," she said, her voice still carrying that careful control. "I am damaged goods, as my uncle frequently reminded me. I will work for my keep if you allow me to stay at your ranch, but I will not be a burden or an obligation you did not agree to. Katherine." He spoke her name for the first time, letting it sit between them. "You wrote to me about starting fresh out here, about leaving behind the constraints and sorrows of your old life. I wrote back that the West offers second chances to those brave enough to take them. Nothing about that has changed." The snow was falling heavily now, beginning to accumulate on the wooden planks of the platform and dusting Catherine's bonnet with white. Victoria could see her shivering despite his coat, and he knew they needed to get moving before the storm made travel impossible. "Silas, help me get her trunk loaded onto my wagon," he called to the driver, who had been watching the exchange with undisguised interest. By tomorrow, everyone in Lovelock would know about the mail-order bride's arrival and her injuries. Victoria found he did not care about gossip. Let them talk. He offered Katherine his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly on his forearm. Even through the layers of his shirt and vest, he could feel how cold her fingers were. He led her carefully across the platform to where his wagon waited, two sturdy horses stamping impatiently in their traces as snow gathered on their backs. "My ranch is about 40 minutes from town under normal conditions," Victoria explained as he helped her up onto the bench seat. "With this storm, it might take longer. There are blankets under the seat, and I have a hot brick wrapped in cloth that should still have some warmth." He retrieved the blankets and tucked them around her with an efficiency that came from years of dealing with harsh weather. Catherine's expression had shifted from wary to bewildered, as if kindness was an unfamiliar language she was struggling to understand. That realization made Victoria's anger toward her uncle burn even hotter. Silas and Victoria made quick work of securing the trunk in the wagon bed and covering it with a canvas tarp. Victoria pressed a silver dollar into the driver's hand, more than the usual tip, and received a knowing nod in return. "You take care of that little lady," Sela said quietly. "She barely said 2 words the whole journey, but she has steel in her spine. You can see it in how she carries herself." "I intend to," Victoria replied, swinging up onto the bench beside Katherine. He took up the reins and clicked his tongue at the horses, who lurched forward with obvious relief at finally being allowed to move. The town of Lovelock proper consisted of a main street with perhaps 24 buildings, including a general store, a saloon, a church, a small schoolhouse, and the boarding house Katherine had mentioned. It was not much to look at, but it was home, and Victoria had learned to appreciate its quiet rhythms after the chaos of his war years. He had been just 16 when he lied about his age to join the Union Army, desperate to escape the suffocating expectations of his father. 4 years of bloodshed had left him with scars both visible and hidden, and the isolation of ranch life suited him far better than crowds or cities ever would. They rode in silence through the empty streets. Most sensible people had already taken shelter from the storm, though Victoria caught a glimpse of old Mrs. Patterson peering through the window of the general store, her face pressed against the glass. He kept his eyes forward and focused on navigating the increasingly snow-covered road. "Tell me about your ranch," Katherine said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Your letters described it, but I would like to hear more." Victoria glanced at her, surprised by the question. She sat very straight despite the blankets wrapped around her, her good eye fixed on the white landscape ahead. He suspected she was trying to distract herself from pain and fear, and he was happy to oblige. "The Broken Spur is about 2,000 acres, mostly grazing land with some good water sources. I run about 500 head of cattle, though I am working on building up my horse stock as well. There is good money in horses if you know what you are doing, and I learned from the best." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "The house itself is solid, built by my grandfather when he first claimed the land in the 50s during the Silver Rush. He never found silver, but he found something better, good land that would sustain a family." "How many people work for you?" Katherine asked. "Right now, I have 4 hands who live in the bunkhouse. Miguel and his son Diego are from California, been with me for 2 years. Good men, hard workers. Then there is Tommy, who is young but learning fast, and Joseph, who is older and has forgotten more about cattle than most men will ever know. I also have a cook named Mary who comes in from town 3 times a week, but I have been doing most of the household management myself since my father passed. And your mother died when I was 12. Pneumonia." Victoria kept his voice neutral, though the loss still ached in quiet moments. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said this place needed laughter and life, things she tried to bring despite the hardness of it all." They had left the town behind now, following a road that was rapidly disappearing under snow. Victoria knew the way by instinct, having traveled it countless times in all weather and conditions. The horses plodded steadily onward, their heads lowered against the wind. "I will do my best to fulfill my duties," Katherine said after another long silence. "I am a good cook and an excellent seamstress. I can manage accounts and I read well. I am not afraid of hard work." "I never thought you were," Victoria replied. "But right now, I need you to focus on healing, not on proving yourself. You have been through an ordeal and recovery takes time." "Time is a luxury," Katherine said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "My uncle taught me that survival requires constant vigilance and usefulness. Those who do not contribute are discarded." Victoria pulled the horses to a stop, ignoring their snorted protests. He turned to face Katherine fully, waiting until her eye met his. Your uncle was wrong about many things, and he was sure as hell wrong about that. You are not livestock to be evaluated for productivity. You are a person, and you have value simply by existing. At my ranch you will be safe, and you will be given time to become whoever you want to be. That is a promise." Catherine's lower lip trembled, and a single tear traced down her bruised cheek. "Why are you being kind to me? You do not know me. I might be a terrible person beneath this proper exterior. I might disappoint you." "Everyone might disappoint everyone," Victoria said with a slight smile. "That is the risk we take when we let people into our lives. But I read your letters, Katherine. I read about your love of books and your dream of seeing mountains. I read about how you cared for your parents until the very end, even though you knew you were risking your own health. I read about your fears and your hopes, and they seemed like the thoughts of someone worth knowing. So I am choosing to believe in the person who wrote those letters." He picked up the reins again and urged the horses forward before she could respond. He had already said more than he typically did in a week, and the vulnerability of the conversation left him feeling exposed. But he meant every word. The ranch house emerged from the swirling snow like a sanctuary, its solid stone walls and covered porch offering promise of warmth and shelter. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant Mary had come by as scheduled and stoked the fires before the storm worsened. The barn stood to the left, large and well-maintained, and the bunkhouse was visible beyond it, lights glowing in its windows. Victoria brought the wagon as close to the house as possible and secured the horses with practiced speed. "I will come back for your trunk once I get you inside," he told Katherine, reaching up to help her down from the bench. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her around the waist, steadying her. This close, he could smell the faint lavender scent that clung to her despite days of travel, and he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Whatever reserves of strength had kept her upright were clearly depleting rapidly. "I can walk," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you can," Victoria said, "but you do not have to." Before she could argue further, he scooped her up into his arms, blankets and all. She weighed almost nothing, and he felt a surge of anger at the deprivation and abuse that had left her so fragile. She stiffened in his arms for a moment, then relaxed slightly, her head dropping to rest against his shoulder. He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door, kicking it shut behind him to keep out the wind and snow. The main room of the house was blessedly warm, the fire in the stone hearth crackling cheerfully. Mary had indeed been there. The space was spotless, and he could smell bread and stew, likely left warming for him. "Welcome home," Victoria said quietly, setting Katherine carefully on her feet. She looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the comfortable furniture, the shelves lined with books, the warm rugs on the wooden floor, and the small touches that made the space livable rather than merely functional. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It is just a house," Victoria said, suddenly self-conscious. "But it is sturdy and warm, and it is yours now as much as mine." He helped her remove his coat and her own cloak, noting how her hands shook with cold and exhaustion. "The bedroom is through there," he said, gesturing to a door on the far side of the room. "It is the largest and has its own fireplace. I will take one of the smaller rooms upstairs." Katherine turned to look at him, confusion clear on her bruised face. "But surely as husband and wife, we will marry when you are ready," Victoria interrupted gently. "Not before. And even then, there are multiple bedrooms in this house. You will have privacy and safety, Katherine. I need you to believe that." She studied him for a long moment, and he let her look, meeting her gaze steadily. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said simply. Victoria showed her to the bedroom, which he had prepared as best he could. The bed was large and covered with quilts his mother had made years ago. There was a wardrobe for her clothes, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a comfortable chair by the fireplace. He quickly built up the fire while she stood in the doorway, still looking overwhelmed. "I will bring your trunk in and leave it outside your door," he said. "There is a lock on this door and the key is on the dresser. Use it if it makes you feel safer. I will heat water for you to wash with, and there is stew and bread in the kitchen when you are hungry. Take whatever time you need." "Will you eat with me?" Katherine asked hesitantly. "I know I must look terrible, but I do not wish to be alone just yet." Victoria felt that strange shifting in his chest again, that sense of his carefully ordered life being rearranged by forces beyond his control. "Of course," he said. "I will tend to the horses and bring in your trunk. Take your time settling in, and I will have everything ready when you come out." He left her then, stepping back out into the storm to take care of the necessary tasks. The wind had picked up significantly, and the snow was now falling so thickly that he could barely see the barn. He worked quickly, unhitching the horses and getting them settled in their stalls with feed and water. Miguel appeared from the tack room, brushing hay from his shirt. "Boss, you made it back just in time," the older man said in his accented English. "This storm, she is going to be a bad one. We have all the cattle moved to the lower pasture where there is some shelter, and we doubled the hay in the barn for the horses." "Good thinking," Victoria said. "The lady has arrived. She will be staying in the main house. I would appreciate it if you and the others could give us some space for the next few days while she settles in." Miguel's dark eyes flickered with curiosity, but he simply nodded. "Of course, boss." Mary left extra food in the kitchen, enough for several days. She said to tell you she will return when the storm passes. Victoria retrieved Katherine's trunk from the wagon, surprised by its weight. Whatever she had brought from Boston, she had packed it well. He hauled it through the snow to the house, leaving it just outside the bedroom door as promised, then set about heating water in the large kettle that hung over the kitchen fire. By the time Katherine emerged from the bedroom, he had laid out bread, butter, stew, and hot coffee on the wooden table that dominated one end of the main room. She had changed into a simple gray dress that was less travel-worn than her previous outfit, and she had removed her bonnet, allowing him to see the full extent of her bruising in the lamplight. Her hair was still pulled back, but a few auburn strands had escaped to frame her face. "Please sit," Victoria said, pulling out a chair for her. She sat carefully, moving like someone whose body was a map of hidden pains. Victoria filled a bowl with stew and placed it before her, then poured coffee into a tin cup. He served himself and sat across from her, waiting until she took the first bite before starting on his own meal. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Victoria watched Katherine from beneath lowered lashes, noting how she held her spoon, the delicate way she broke her bread, the small sigh of satisfaction that escaped her after the first few bites. "This is excellent," she said finally. "Did you make this?" Mary did. "She is a widow from town who comes out to help with cooking and heavy cleaning. You will like her. She has opinions about everything and is not shy about sharing them." A ghost of a smile touched Katherine's lips. "She sounds formidable, she is, but she has a good heart." Victoria hesitated, then continued. "I want you to know that you can be honest with me about what happened in Boston. Not tonight if you are not ready, but eventually. Secrets have a way of festering, and I would rather face hard truths than comfortable lies." Katherine set down her spoon, her expression growing distant. "My uncle is a wealthy merchant, well respected in society. No one would believe me if I told them what happened in his house. I tried once to confide in a family friend. She suggested I was being dramatic and ungrateful. My uncle overheard and broke 3 of my ribs that night. Victoria's hand tightened around his cup, the only outward sign of his fury. He will not touch you again, I swear it. He does not know where I am, Katherine said, though uncertainty colored her voice. And even if he did, surely he would not follow me across the country for a worthless niece he was glad to be rid of. You are not worthless, Victoria said firmly, but we will take precautions regardless. I have friends in town, including the sheriff. If your uncle shows up, he will not get near you. Katherine nodded, though she did not look entirely convinced. She returned her attention to her stew, and they finished the meal in companionable quiet. When they had both eaten their fill, Victoria cleared the table while Katherine sat in one of the chairs by the fire, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Tell me about Lovelock," she said as he worked. "Your letters mentioned it was a small town, but I would like to know more about the people." Victoria dried his hands and joined her by the fire, settling into the chair opposite hers. "It is small, maybe 300 people on a good day. Most folks are ranchers or work in services supporting the ranches. We have a sheriff named Daniel Cole, decent man who keeps the peace without being heavy-handed. The general store is run by Amos Patterson and his wife Margaret, and they have been here since the town was founded. There is a school teacher named Miss Sarah Jenkins who came from San Francisco 2 years ago. She is young but good with the children." He paused, thinking about the other residents. "The doctor is a man named Harrison Webb. He trained back east and came out here for his health. He is good at what he does, and I think you should see him about your injuries when the storm passes." Katherine's hand moved instinctively to her bruised face. "I do not need a doctor. The wounds are healing on their own." "Humor me," Victoria said gently. "Some injuries are not visible on the surface, and I would feel better knowing you had a proper examination." She looked like she wanted to argue but finally nodded. "Very well, if it would ease your mind." They talked for another hour as the storm raged outside, the conversation flowing more easily than Victoria had expected. Katherine asked about his family history, and he found himself telling her about his grandfather's journey from Missouri, his father's struggles to keep the ranch running during the war, and his mother's determination to create beauty in a harsh landscape. In turn, Katherine spoke of her childhood in Boston, her father's work as a professor of literature, and her mother's gentle nature. She did not mention her uncle again, and Victoria did not press. There would be time for those darker conversations later, when trust had been more firmly established. Finally, Katherine's eyes began to droop, exhaustion overtaking her. Victoria stood and offered his hand to help her up. "You need rest. Tomorrow we can begin figuring out how to make this work." "Mr. Farrow," Katherine said as they reached her bedroom door, "thank you for not turning me away. I know this is not what you expected when you sent for a mail-order bride." "Victoria," he corrected. "If we are to be married, you should use my given name. And Katherine, you are exactly what I need, even if neither of us knew it until today. Sleep well." He watched her slip into the bedroom and heard the soft click of the lock engaging. Instead of feeling insulted, he felt relieved that she was taking precautions for her own peace of mind. He built up the main fire one more time, checked that all the doors and windows were secured against the storm, then climbed the stairs to one of the smaller bedrooms he had prepared for himself. Sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind howl around the house and thinking about the small woman sleeping below him. His life had changed irrevocably today, shifted onto a path he had not anticipated but found himself willing to follow. Katherine was not what he had expected, but she was already becoming something more important. She was his responsibility, his promise, and potentially his future. The storm lasted 3 days, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow on the ranch and making travel impossible. Victoria found himself oddly grateful for the forced isolation. It gave him and Katherine time to learn each other without the pressure of town gossip or social obligations. The first full day, Katherine barely emerged from her room except for meals. Victoria respected her need for space, occupying himself with indoor tasks like mending tack and reviewing his account books. But by the second day, she ventured out more, exploring the house and eventually asking if she could look at his books. "They belong to my mother mostly," Victoria explained, standing beside her at the shelves. She loved to read and ordered books from catalogs whenever she could afford them. Some were my father's, histories and agricultural texts, and these here are mine. Catherine's finger traced the spines reverently. "You have poetry," she said with wonder. "Whitman and Dickinson." "I know it is not typical cowboy reading," Victoria said with a self-conscious shrug, "but I like how they use words. They make the ordinary seem significant." "It is wonderful," Katherine said, turning to look at him with genuine warmth in her expression. "My father would have approved. He always said that poetry was the language of the soul." She selected a volume of Dickinson and settled into one of the chairs by the fire, reading contentedly while Victoria worked on his accounts. The comfortable silence that fell between them felt significant, a sign that they could exist in the same space without strain or tension. On the third day, Katherine asked if she could help prepare meals. Victoria agreed, and they worked side by side in the kitchen, his larger frame awkward in the domestic space but game to try. Katherine moved with the efficiency of someone trained in household management, her hands quick and sure despite her healing injuries. They made bread together, her laughter ringing out when his first attempt at kneading produced a lump of dough that resembled a rock more than food. "You have to be gentler," she instructed, placing her smaller hands over his to demonstrate the proper technique. "Feel how the dough responds. You want to work with it, not against it." The casual touch should not have affected him as strongly as it did, but Victoria found himself intensely aware of her proximity, the warmth of her hands, the concentration on her face as she guided his movements. When the bread finally went into the oven and emerged golden and fragrant, he felt an absurd pride in their joint accomplishment. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Katherine finally brought up the topic that had been hovering unspoken between them. "When would you like to marry?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "I know you said we would wait until I was ready, but I also understand that the arrangement requires it. I do not wish to impose on your hospitality indefinitely without fulfilling my part of our agreement." Victoria set aside the harness he had been oiling and gave her his full attention. "This is not about fulfilling agreements or obligations, Katherine. Marriage is serious, and I will not enter into it unless we both believe it has a chance of being more than just a legal convenience." "But surely you sent for a bride because you wanted a wife, not a house guest," Katherine pressed. "I am grateful for your kindness, but I am also practical. We barely know each other, and yet circumstances require us to build a life together. Delaying will not change those facts." "No, but it might give us a foundation to build on," Victoria countered. "I have seen marriages of pure convenience, and they are often miserable for everyone involved. I would like to think we could do better than that." Katherine studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away, but he held her gaze. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "In Boston, the men I knew were either cruel like my uncle or weak like the ones who stood by and did nothing. You are neither of those things, and I find myself uncertain how to navigate that. Be yourself, Victoria said simply. That is all I ask. Be honest with me. Tell me when you are hurting or afraid or angry. Let me know you as you are, not as you think you should be. And what about you? Katherine challenged. Will you extend the same honesty to me? Victoria considered this, recognizing the fairness of her question. I will try, he said. I am not naturally inclined to talk about myself, but I will make the effort if it helps you feel more secure. Katherine nodded slowly. Then I propose we take the next few weeks to truly get to know one another. When the spring comes, if we both still believe this can work, we will marry. Does that seem reasonable? More than reasonable, Victoria agreed, feeling relief wash through him. And Katherine, for what it is worth, I am glad you are here. Whatever brought you to my door, I am grateful for it. A blush colored her pale cheeks, making the bruises stand out more starkly. I am beginning to be glad as well, she admitted softly. The storm broke during the night, and Victoria woke to brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs to find Katherine already awake and preparing coffee in the kitchen. She wore a simple brown dress he had not seen before, and she had attempted to style her hair in a more elaborate fashion, though the bruising on her face remained stark. Good morning, she greeted him with a tentative smile. I hope I did not overstep by starting breakfast. Not at all, Victoria assured her. This is your home now. You do not need permission to use the kitchen or anything else. They ate together, discussing plans for the day. The hands would need to check on the cattle and clear paths to essential buildings. Victoria wanted to ride into town to collect any supplies that might have come in on the last freight wagon before the storm, and he suggested Katherine might want to accompany him. I know your face is still healing, he said carefully. But the longer we delay your introduction to the town, the more speculation there will be. People here are generally kind, but they are also curious. Better to control the narrative from the start. Katherine paled slightly but lifted her chin with that defiant tilt he was coming to recognize. You are right, of course. I cannot hide forever, and I would like to meet the doctor you mentioned. They set out mid-morning in the wagon, the same vehicle that had brought Katherine from town 3 days earlier. The road had been partially cleared by wind, though drifts remained in places. The landscape was transformed by snow. The harsh browns and grays of Nevada winter softened into gentle whites and blues. Katherine sat beside him wrapped in blankets, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. It is beautiful, she said, gazing at the snow-covered mountains in the distance. Different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way. Wait until spring, Victoria said. The desert blooms in ways you would not expect. Wildflowers everywhere, and the air smells like sage and possibility. They reached Lovelock to find the town bustling with activity as residents dug out from the storm. Several people called greetings to Victoria, their eyes sliding with poorly concealed curiosity to Katherine. He kept the wagon moving toward the doctor's office, determined to accomplish at least one task before the inevitable social gauntlet began. Dr. Harrison Webb was a man in his late 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. He greeted them warmly and showed no visible reaction to Katherine's bruises beyond a slight tightening around his mouth. Mr. Farrow, a pleasure as always, and you must be Miss Holloway. Welcome to Lovelock. Thank you, Doctor, Katherine said with quiet dignity. I apologize for troubling you so soon after my arrival. No trouble at all, Webb assured her. Why do not we step into the examination room and you can tell me what brings you here? Victoria started to rise to accompany them, but Katherine placed a hand on his arm. Would you mind waiting here? I would prefer to speak with the doctor privately. He wanted to protest, to insist on staying to offer support, but he recognized her need for autonomy. "Of course. I will be right here if you need me." The examination took nearly 30 minutes, during which Victoria paced the small waiting area and imagined increasingly terrible diagnoses. When Katherine finally emerged, her eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was composed. "The doctor would like to speak with you," she said quietly. "I will wait here." Victoria entered the examination room to find Webb washing his hands in a basin, his face grim. "Mr. Farrow, I will be direct. Miss Holloway has sustained significant injuries over an extended period. The bruising on her face and torso is the most visible, but she also has poorly healed rib fractures, a dislocated finger that's set incorrectly, and scarring that suggests repeated beatings. She is malnourished and anemic. Physically, she will recover with proper care and nutrition, but the emotional toll of such sustained abuse cannot be underestimated." Victoria felt rage building in his chest, but he forced it down, channeling it into cold determination. "What does she need?" "Rest, good food, and safety," Webb said. "And time. The body heals faster than the mind in cases like this. She may struggle with nightmares, with fear of sudden movements or loud noises. Patience will be your greatest asset." He paused, then added, "She also asked me not to tell you some of what I found. I am honoring that request, as is her right, but I want you to understand that her recovery will be neither quick nor linear." "I understand," Victoria said. "Whatever she needs, she will have it." Webb nodded approvingly. "She is lucky to have found you, Farrow. Not every man would respond with such decency." They collected Katherine from the waiting room, and Victoria paid the doctor's fee despite Webb's protests. Back on the street, they were immediately intercepted by Margaret Patterson, the general store owner's wife, a formidable woman known for her nosiness disguised as neighborly concern. "Victoria Farrow, you sly dog," she said with a broad smile. "Keeping your bride hidden away during the storm. We have all been dying to meet her. Mrs. Patterson, this is Katherine Holloway. Katherine, Margaret Patterson, runs the general store with her husband." "How do you do?" Katherine said, extending her hand with practiced grace despite the visible evidence of her injuries. Margaret's eyes widened slightly as she took in Katherine's appearance, but to her credit, she did not comment directly. "Welcome to Lovelock, dear. I hope Victoria has been treating you well." "He has been most kind," Katherine replied. "Well, you must come by the store soon. We have a sewing circle that meets every Thursday, and you would be most welcome. It would be a good way to meet the other ladies." Margaret leaned in conspiratorially. "I will warn you, they are a gossipy bunch, but their hearts are generally in the right place." "I would like that very much," Katherine said, and she sounded sincere. They made their escape after a few more minutes of small talk, with Victoria promising to bring Katherine by the store later in the week. As they continued down the street, several other townspeople stopped to introduce themselves. Sheriff Cole was among them, a tall man with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Holloway," he said after Victoria made the introduction, "I hope you will find our town welcoming. If you ever need assistance of any kind, please do not hesitate to come find me." There was a weight to his words that suggested he had noticed her bruises and drawn his own conclusions. Katherine seemed to understand this as well, because she met his gaze directly and said, "Thank you, Sheriff. I will remember that." They collected supplies from the general store and made one more stop at the church, where Reverend Thomas expressed delight at meeting Katherine and invited them to attend services on Sunday. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "That was exhausting," Katherine admitted as they drove, but not as terrible as I feared. The people seem kind if overly curious." "Small towns are like that," Victoria said. "Privacy is a luxury in places like this, but they rally when someone needs help and they are fiercely protective of their own. You are one of their own now." Katherine was quiet for a moment. "The doctor told you what he found, did he not?" "Some of it. He said there were things you asked him to keep private, and he honored that." "I need you to know that I am not broken," Katherine said, her voice tight. "I have been hurt, but I am not shattered beyond repair. I will not be treated like fragile glass that might break at any moment." Victoria pulled the horses to a stop and turned to face her. "I do not think you are broken, Katherine. I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. The fact that you survived what you did and still have the courage to start over speaks to a core of steel. But strength does not mean you have to carry everything alone. Let me help bear some of the weight." Tears spilled down her cheeks and she dashed them away impatiently. "I am not accustomed to kindness. It unmoors me." "Then we will learn together," Victoria said. "Because I am not accustomed to having someone to care for, and I am certain to make mistakes. But we will figure it out as we go." She nodded, sniffling slightly, and he urged the horses back into motion. The rest of the ride passed in silence, but it was a comfortable one, heavy with mutual understanding and the beginning of trust. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Victoria with its contentment. Katherine took over most of the household management, though she frequently consulted him on decisions and preferences. She proved to be an excellent cook, her meals far surpassing Mary's adequate but uninspired offerings. The house began to feel more like a home under her influence, small touches appearing that softened its masculine functionality. Fresh flowers in a vase on the table, despite the winter season. She had coaxed bulbs into blooming on the sunny windowsill. Curtains she had sewn from fabric ordered from the general store, bright patterns that caught the light. Books left open on the chairs, inviting conversation about their contents. The scent of bread baking and coffee brewing, domestic rituals that marked the passage of days. Victoria found himself looking forward to returning to the house after long days working the ranch. He would stomp the snow from his boots on the porch and enter, to find Katherine reading by the fire or working on her sewing, and she would look up with a smile that made something warm unfurl in his chest. They would eat together and talk, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the philosophical, and he discovered depths in her that the letters had only hinted at. She was wickedly funny when comfortable, her observations about town personalities delivered with a dry wit that made him laugh. She was well-read and intelligent, able to discuss literature and current events with insight. And she was kind, showing patience with his social awkwardness and genuine interest in his stories about the ranch. But there were hard moments too. The night he accidentally dropped a pan in the kitchen, and she flinched so violently she knocked over her chair. The time he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she froze, terror flashing in her eyes before she recognized where she was. The nightmares that sometimes woke her, her cries audible through the bedroom door, though she never spoke of them in the morning. Victoria learned to move carefully around her, to announce his presence before entering a room, to keep his voice modulated and his movements predictable. He learned that she responded better to questions than commands, that she needed control over her choices in ways both large and small. And slowly, incrementally, he watched her begin to relax into the safety he offered. 6 weeks after her arrival, they attended the Thursday sewing circle at Margaret Patterson's invitation. Victoria spent the afternoon in the saloon with some of the other ranchers, discussing cattle prices and grazing strategies, but his mind kept drifting to Katherine, and wondering how she was managing the social crucible of the town ladies. He need not have worried. When he collected her from the Patterson house, she was flushed and smiling, her arms full of borrowed patterns and her head full of gossip. "They are terrible and wonderful," she told him as they drove home. They asked 1,000 questions, most of them wildly inappropriate, but they also welcomed me without reservation. "And Victoria, they are making me a wedding quilt. They assume we will marry in the spring and they want to give us a proper gift." "Are we marrying in the spring?" Victoria asked, his heart rate picking up slightly. Katherine turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I would like to if you still wish it. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my adult life. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect feels like. I know I am not the bride you imagined when you placed that advertisement, but I will do my best to be a good wife." Victoria pulled the wagon to a stop, needing to say this without the distraction of driving. "Katherine, you are exactly the bride I need. I sent for a practical partner, someone to share the work of the ranch. What I got instead is someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to be better, who has turned my house into a home. I would be honored to marry you whenever you are ready." "Easter Sunday," Katherine said decisively. "It is traditional, and it gives us 2 more months to be certain. And it gives the ladies time to finish the quilt," she added with a small smile. "Easter Sunday it is," Victoria agreed, feeling like he had just made the most important promise of his life. The betrothal, unofficial though it was, changed something between them. They grew more comfortable with casual touches, Katherine's hand on his arm as they walked, Victoria's hand at the small of her back as he guided her through doorways. They sat closer together in the evenings, their shoulders brushing as they read or talked. And Victoria found himself thinking more and more about what their wedding night would mean, about the intimacy they would share, and hoping he could be patient and gentle enough to make it good for her. In early February, disaster struck in the form of a telegram delivered by a breathless rider from town. Victoria read it with growing dread, then read it again hoping he had misunderstood. "What is it?" Katherine asked, seeing his expression. "Your uncle," Victoria said grimly. "He has contacted the sheriff, claiming you stole money and family jewelry when you left Boston. He is demanding your return to face charges, or failing that, he wants the items and monetary restitution for his trouble." Katherine went white, swaying on her feet. Victoria caught her and guided her to a chair, kneeling beside her. "Breathe," he commanded gently. "Just breathe. He cannot touch you here." "He will make good on his threats," Katherine whispered. "He has connections and money." "He could have me arrested, dragged back to Boston." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Absolutely not. We will fight this. Tomorrow we go to town and talk to Sheriff Cole. We tell him everything and we make sure your uncle's lies do not stand." "You do not understand," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face. "I did take money. My aunt gave it to me, but it came from his accounts. And I took my mother's necklace, the one she left me in her will. He will claim I stole it, and technically he may be right since he was my legal guardian." Victoria cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then we will return his damned money and the necklace, every cent and every jewel. Your freedom is worth more than any material goods. Do you understand me? We will give him what he wants and we will buy your peace." "I cannot ask you to pay for my mistakes," Katherine protested. "You are not asking, I am offering. And they are not mistakes. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that." Victoria stood and pulled her up with him, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace he hoped conveyed safety and solidarity. "We face this together. He does not get to have power over you anymore." Katherine clung to him, her face buried against his chest, and he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. He held her until the storm of emotion passed, then helped her wash her face and bundled her into the wagon for the cold ride to town. Sheriff Cole listened to their story with a grave expression, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "First, let me be clear. Based on what you have told me, no judge in Nevada would honor an extradition request for these supposed crimes. Your aunt gave you money freely, and the necklace was bequeathed to you by your mother. Your uncle may have legal guardianship, but that does not give him ownership of your possessions or the right to abuse you." "But he has influence in Boston," Katherine said. "He could make things very difficult." "Perhaps in Boston," Cole agreed. "But this is Nevada, and we handle things differently out here. However, it might be wise to resolve this quickly and cleanly to prevent further harassment. If you return his money and the jewelry with a letter stating that all debts are settled, witnessed by myself and the Reverend, he would have no further legal standing to pursue you." "How much money did your aunt give you?" Victoria asked Katherine. $200, she said quietly. "And the necklace might be worth another 100. Victoria did quick mental calculations. It would make a significant dent in his savings, but he had planned for contingencies, and this qualified. "We will send him $350 and the necklace, plus 50 extra to compensate for his trouble and time. In return, he signs a document relinquishing all claims to Katherine and acknowledging the matter as resolved." "I cannot let you do this," Katherine protested. "That is your money, your security. And you are my future wife," Victoria said. "What is mine is yours. We resolve this now so we can move forward without his shadow hanging over us." Sheriff Cole nodded approvingly. "I will draft the documents today. You get me the money and the necklace, and I will arrange for it to be sent via secure courier with return receipt. If your uncle is half as practical as he is cruel, he will take the money and consider himself well rid of you." They completed the transaction that afternoon. Katherine reluctantly surrendered the necklace, though Victoria saw the pain in her eyes as she placed the delicate gold chain in the sheriff's hand. "It was my mother's," she whispered, "the only thing I have of hers." "We will buy you a new necklace," Victoria promised. "One that has no bad memories attached, something that is purely yours and purely joyful." The response from Boston arrived 3 weeks later. Katherine's uncle had accepted the payment and signed the documents, though the letter that accompanied them was filled with vitriol and barely concealed threats. Sheriff Cole burned it without showing it to Katherine. "It is done," he told them. "You are free of him legally and financially. He has no claim on you, and if he attempts to contact you again, we will treat it as harassment." The relief on Katherine's face was profound, years seeming to fall away as the burden lifted. That night, she insisted on cooking a celebratory dinner, and they ate and laughed together like people who had been granted a second chance at life. "I have something for you," Victoria said after they finished eating. He retrieved a small box from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Katherine opened it with trembling hands to reveal a silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a wild rose, Nevada's state flower. It was simple but beautifully crafted, catching the lamplight. "Oh, Victoria," she breathed. "It is perfect. May I?" he asked, gesturing to the necklace. She nodded, and he moved behind her, carefully fastening the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, and he felt her shiver, though he thought it might be for reasons different than fear. "Thank you," she said when he returned to his seat. "For everything. For taking me in, for protecting me, for giving me a life I never dreamed possible. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Katherine," Victoria said seriously, "you do not need to repay me. I did not do any of this expecting compensation or gratitude. I did it because it was right, and because I have come to care for you deeply." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. "I care for you too," she said softly. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. You have become essential to me." Victoria reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at how small it was in his, how delicate and yet how strong. "Then we build our life together, as partners and equals. No debts, no obligations, just two people choosing each other every day." "I choose you," Katherine said, and it sounded like a vow. "And I choose you," Victoria replied, sealing the promise. The weeks leading up to Easter were filled with preparation and anticipation. The town had embraced the upcoming wedding with enthusiasm, and it seemed everyone wanted to contribute something. The schoolteacher offered to play piano for the ceremony. The saloon owner donated wine for the reception. The ladies finished the wedding quilt, a beautiful pattern in blues and whites that they presented to Katherine with ceremony and affection. Victoria worked with his hands to prepare the master bedroom for their shared life. He repainted the walls a soft cream color Katherine had admired in a catalog. He built her a new wardrobe to supplement the existing one, carving a delicate flower pattern into the doors. He made sure the fireplace drew properly and that the windows sealed tightly against drafts. Katherine sewed her own wedding dress, working late into the evenings by lamplight. She refused to let Victoria see it, insisting on tradition despite their unconventional courtship. She also worked on items for their shared household, embroidering pillowcases and hemming curtains, nesting in ways that made the house increasingly feel like their home rather than his. They spent their evenings talking about the future, making plans that ranged from practical to fantastical. Katherine wanted to start a vegetable garden in the spring, to plant roses by the porch, to perhaps raise chickens for eggs. Victoria talked about expanding the horse breeding program, about possibly buying the adjacent property if it came up for sale, about the children he hoped they would have someday if Katherine was willing. "How many children?" she asked one evening, her tone teasing but her eyes serious. "As many as you want," Victoria said. "Or none if that is your preference. I know childbirth carries risks, and I will not pressure you into something you do not desire." Katherine was quiet for a long moment. "I would like children," she said finally. "Perhaps 2 or 3 if we are blessed. I want to give them the childhood I had before my parents died, full of love and books and laughter. I want them to grow up knowing they are safe and valued." "They will," Victoria promised. "Any child of yours could not be otherwise." Easter Sunday arrived with perfect spring weather, warm sunshine and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and possibility. The church was packed with townspeople, all dressed in their finest, murmuring with anticipation. Victoria stood at the altar in his best suit, a new one he had ordered from San Francisco for the occasion, his hands sweating despite the mild temperature. Miguel served as his best man, the older ranch hand looking uncomfortable but proud in his formal attire. Sarah Jenkins played a traditional hymn on the piano, and the congregation rose as the doors opened. Katherine appeared, and Victoria forgot how to breathe. She wore a dress of ivory silk, simple in design but elegant, the fabric catching the light streaming through the windows. Her auburn hair was styled in an elaborate updo, with small white flowers woven through it. The bruises that had marked her face on arrival were long gone, and she glowed with health and happiness. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, and around her neck she wore the silver rose necklace he had given her. Margaret Patterson walked her down the aisle in the absence of family, and when they reached the altar, The older woman placed Catherine's hand in Victoria's with a meaningful look that said clearly, "You take care of her." Reverend Thomas conducted a simple ceremony, speaking of love and partnership, of the covenant being made before God and community. Victoria made his vows in a clear voice, promising to honor and cherish Catherine for all his days. Catherine's voice shook slightly as she made her own promises, but her eyes never left his, and he could see the truth of her words reflected there. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria cupped Catherine's face gently and kissed her for the first time. It was soft and sweet, a promise of tenderness, and when they broke apart, her eyes were shining with tears. "Hello, wife," Victoria whispered. "Hello, husband," Catherine replied, her smile radiant. The reception was held in the church hall, with tables laden with food contributed by seemingly every household in town. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter, and through it all, Victoria never let go of Catherine's hand. They moved through the celebration together, accepting congratulations and good wishes, but always aware of each other, always connected. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the party, climbing into the decorated wagon for the ride back to the ranch. Tin cans rattled behind them, tied by mischievous well-wishers, and Catherine laughed at the noise, the sound pure and joyful. "Are you happy?" Victoria asked as they drove through the gathering dusk. "Deliriously," Catherine said. "I keep thinking I might wake up and discover this has all been a dream, that I am still in Boston, still trapped, and none of this is real." "It is real," Victoria assured her. "We are real. Our life together is real, and I will spend every day making sure you never doubt that." They arrived home to find the house prepared by Mary and some of the other ranch wives. Candles glowed in every window. A fire crackled in the hearth. The master bedroom had been transformed with fresh linens and scattered rose petals, a romantic touch that made Catherine blush. Victoria carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, then set her carefully on her feet in the center of the main room. Suddenly the air between them felt charged with possibility and nervousness. "Catherine," Victoria said, taking her hands, "I want you to know that tonight does not have to be anything you are not ready for. We are married in the eyes of the law and God, and that is enough for now. We can take our time with the rest." Catherine looked up at him, and he saw love and trust and determination in her expression. "I am ready," she said. "I want this, I want you. I am not afraid any more." "Then come to bed with me," Victoria said, leading her toward the master bedroom, "and let me show you what it means to be cherished." What followed was tender and slow, Victoria taking his time to map her body with gentle hands and reverent kisses, learning what made her sigh and what made her gasp. He was careful with her, mindful of her past hurts, and she responded with a passion that matched his own, her initial nervousness giving way to wonder and pleasure. They came together with a sweetness that transcended physical need, a joining of not just bodies but souls, and afterwards they lay tangled together, both slightly stunned by the intensity of the experience. "I love you," Catherine whispered into the darkness. "I do not know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between your coat over my shoulders and this moment, I fell completely in love with you." "I love you too," Victoria replied, pulling her closer. "From the moment I saw you step down from that stagecoach, bruised but unbowed, I knew you were extraordinary. Everything since has only confirmed it." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching out before them full of promise and possibility. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of work and joy. Catherine embraced ranch life with enthusiasm, learning to ride and helping with the garden that soon flourished under her care. She became a beloved figure in town, known for her kindness and her quick wit. The sewing circle ladies adopted her as one of their own, and she developed particular friendships with Sarah Jenkins and the doctor's wife, Emma. Victoria expanded the horse breeding program as planned, with Katherine proving to have an unexpected talent for working with the animals. She spent hours in the barn, gentling colts and fillies with patience and soft words, and the horses responded to her touch in ways that impressed even Miguel. They settled into rhythms of domesticity that felt natural and right. Morning coffee shared before the day's work began. Evenings by the fire reading or talking. Sundays spent resting and exploring the land together. Nights tangled together in their bed, learning each other's bodies with increasing confidence and joy. In late autumn, Katherine began to feel unwell. At first she attributed it to a stomach ailment, but when the nausea persisted and her monthly courses failed to arrive, she realized with dawning wonder that she might be carrying their child. Dr. Webb confirmed the pregnancy in November, estimating the baby would arrive in late May or early June. Victoria received the news with a mixture of joy and terror, immediately becoming obsessively protective of Katherine's health and comfort. "You will drive me mad with your hovering," Katherine told him fondly after he had forbidden her from carrying anything heavier than a teacup. "I am pregnant, not made of glass." "You are carrying the most precious cargo in the world," Victoria countered. "Forgive me for being cautious." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Katherine suffered from persistent nausea in the early months and fatigue that left her sleeping far more than usual. Victoria adjusted ranch operations so he could spend more time near the house, unwilling to leave her alone for extended periods. As her belly swelled with their growing child, Victoria found himself overwhelmed by love and gratitude. He would lie with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move, and marvel at the miracle of it all. That he could have this, a wife he adored and a child on the way, seemed almost too good to be true. "What should we name them?" Katherine asked one evening as they sat together, her feet in his lap as he massaged her swollen ankles. "I was thinking Victoria Jr. if it is a boy," Victoria said with a completely straight face. Katherine threw a pillow at him. "Absolutely not. The child will have their own identity, not be a smaller version of you." "Fair enough," Victoria laughed. "What do you suggest?" They debated names for hours, finally settling on a list of possibilities. For a boy, they liked Vincent or Victor, keeping the first-letter tradition but making it distinct. For a girl, they considered Lydia, Charlotte, or Grace. In early June, 3 weeks before the baby was due, Katherine's water broke in the middle of the night. Victoria, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, woke immediately and sprang into action. He sent Diego racing to town for Dr. Webb and Emma, then returned to Katherine to help her through the early contractions. "I am terrified," Katherine admitted as another contraction gripped her. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" "You can do this," Victoria said with absolute conviction. "You are the strongest person I know, and you are not alone. I am right here and I am not going anywhere." The labor lasted 16 hours, the longest 16 hours of Victoria's life. He stayed by Katherine's side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement and love. Dr. Webb and Emma managed the medical aspects with calm efficiency, but it was Victoria's presence that seemed to anchor Katherine, giving her something to focus on when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. Finally, as the sun was setting on a perfect June evening, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being evicted from his comfortable home. Dr. Webb placed the squalling infant on Katherine's chest, and both parents stared at him in awe. "Hello, Vincent," Katherine whispered, touching the baby's tiny fist with one finger. "We have been waiting for you." Vincent Holloway Farrow was perfect in every way, with a downy cap of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same deep brown as his father's. He had Catherine's delicate features and Victoria's strong chin, a perfect blend of both parents. Victoria had held hardened criminals at gunpoint without flinching, had faced down stampeding cattle and broken horses, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming emotion of holding his son for the first time. He cradled the tiny bundle with infinite care, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "Thank you," he said to Katherine, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for him for choosing me." "Always," Katherine replied, exhausted but radiant. "I will always choose you." Vincent proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and nursing well. Katherine recovered from the birth quickly, though Victoria continued his protective hovering, much to her amused exasperation. The ranch hands took turns peeking at the new arrival, and the town ladies organized a constant stream of visitors bearing gifts and advice. As Vincent grew from newborn to infant, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and alert, his eyes following movement with intense focus. He laughed easily and often, a gurgling sound that never failed to delight his parents, and he was clearly devoted to his mother, though he would settle contentedly in Victoria's arms when needed. The Farrow family fell into new rhythms, their life reorganizing around the demands and joys of parenthood. Victoria took on more help at the ranch so he could spend time with his wife and son. Katherine managed the household and the baby with impressive efficiency, though she was not too proud to ask for help when needed. On Vincent's first birthday, they threw a party that most of the town attended. The house overflowed with friends and neighbors, with gifts and laughter and joy. Victoria stood on the porch watching Katherine play with Vincent in the yard, chasing him as he toddled on unsteady legs, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. Miguel appeared beside him, 2 cups of cider in hand. He offered one to Victoria with a knowing smile. "You have built a good life, boss," the older man said. "Your father would be proud." "I have been lucky," Victoria said, accepting the cup. "More lucky than I deserve." "Not luck," Miguel corrected. "Choice. You chose to be a good man and you chose a good woman." Everything else followed from that. Victoria considered this as he watched his wife and son. He thought about the day Katherine had arrived in a snowstorm with a black eye, broken but unbowed. He thought about the promise he had made, that no one would hurt her again. It was a promise he had kept, and one he would continue to keep for the rest of his life. 3 years later, Katherine gave birth to their daughter, Grace Elizabeth Farrow, in a much easier labor that lasted only 6 hours. Grace inherited her mother's auburn hair and sage-green eyes, along with a temperament that could only be described as determined. From the moment she could crawl, she chased after her older brother with single-minded devotion, and Vincent accepted his role as protective sibling with admirable patience. The ranch continued to prosper under Victoria's management. The horse breeding program gained a regional reputation for quality, and the cattle operation expanded onto the adjacent property they had been able to purchase. They hired more hands and built a new barn, improvements that reflected their growing success. But more than material prosperity, the Farrow Ranch became known for something else: happiness. It was there in the sound of children's laughter echoing across the yard, in the sight of Victoria and Katherine working side by side in the garden, in the family dinners shared around the table, with stories and jokes and easy affection, in the way Victoria would pull Katherine into his arms when he thought no one was looking, holding her like she was precious and beloved. The years passed, each one building on the foundation they had established. Vincent grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books like his mother and horses like his father. Grace became a force of nature, fearless and bright. And Catherine and Victoria's love deepened with time, maturing into something solid and enduring. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Victoria surprised Catherine with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Miguel's wife and spent a week exploring the city, attending plays, shopping, and simply enjoying time alone together. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked one evening as they walked along the waterfront, the setting sun painting the bay in shades of gold and pink. "Coming west, marrying me, choosing this life." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. "Victoria Farrow, in the 10 years we have been married, have you learned nothing about me?" "I have learned you make excellent pie and you cheat at cards," Victoria said with a grin. She swatted his arm. "I do not cheat. I simply play strategically." Then her expression softened. "I have never regretted choosing you, not for one single moment. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me safety and love and children and a home. You showed me what it means to be valued and respected. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just wanted to make sure," Victoria said, pulling her close. "Because I fall more in love with you every day, and I wanted to know if you felt the same." "I do," Catherine said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years to come, I choose you, Victoria. Always." They returned to the ranch renewed and reconnected, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The children greeted them with enthusiasm, and life resumed its comfortable patterns. More years passed, marked by the milestones of family life. Vincent's graduation from the local school and his decision to work the ranch alongside his father. Grace's determination to attend a women's college back east, despite her parents' concerns about the distance. The expansion of the house to accommodate visiting grandchildren when the time came. Through it all, Victoria and Catherine remained each other's constant, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together gracefully, silver threading through their hair, lines of laughter marking their faces. They worked side by side, raised their children, supported their community, and built a legacy that would outlast them both. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Victoria looked across the table at Catherine and marveled once again at the turn his life had taken. She caught his eye and smiled, that same smile that had first appeared when she realized she was safe, when she understood that his promise to protect her was genuine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked later, when the celebration had ended and they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I am thinking about the day you arrived in a snowstorm with a black eye," Victoria said honestly. "About the moment I promised that no one would hurt you again." "You kept that promise," Catherine said, lacing her fingers through his. "You have kept it every day for 30 years. "It was the easiest promise I ever made," Victoria replied. "Loving you, protecting you, building a life with you, none of it has been a burden. All of it has been a gift." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance meeting. The years continued to pass, as years do, but the love between Victoria and Katherine Farrow never dimmed. It remained constant, a beacon that guided their family and inspired those around them. When people in Lovelock told stories about true love and second chances, they always mentioned the mail-order bride who arrived in a snowstorm and the cowboy who promised she would never be hurt again. And every time the story was told, someone would add, "And he kept that promise, every single day for the rest of their lives together. Because he did. Victoria Farrow was 68 when he finally slowed down enough to let Vincent take over most of the ranch operations. His joints ached in the mornings, and he tired more easily than he once had. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Katherine burned as bright as ever. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending the garden, reading together, playing with grandchildren who visited frequently from various corners of the West. Katherine aged gracefully, her auburn hair now completely silver but her green eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. She remained active in town, serving on various charitable committees and hosting the sewing circle at the ranch house when weather permitted. Her bruises had long since faded into distant memory, though she still wore the silver rose necklace Victoria had given her all those years ago, the metal now worn smooth by decades of wear. On a warm September evening, as the sun set over the Nevada landscape they both loved, Victoria and Katherine sat on the porch in rocking chairs they had purchased for this stage of life. Grace and her family were visiting, and the sounds of children's laughter drifted from inside the house where Vincent was telling stories to the youngest generation. "You remember when this porch was empty except for us?" Katherine asked, her hand finding Victoria's between their chairs. "When it was just the two of us figuring out how to be married. I remember everything," Victoria said. "Every conversation, every moment. The life we built has exceeded my wildest dreams." Katherine smiled, that radiant expression he had fallen in love with decades ago. "Mine too. When I stepped off that stagecoach in the snow, terrified and hurting, I never imagined I would find this. A love so deep it sustained me through everything. Children and grandchildren to carry our legacy forward, a community that became family. All because you made a promise and kept it." "No one hurts you again," Victoria repeated, the words that had started everything. "That was the easy part. Learning to love you, being loved by you, that was the adventure." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, surrounded by the life they had created, and both knew with certainty that they had found something rare and precious. Their story had begun with pain and fear, but it had transformed into something beautiful. A love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and grown stronger with each passing year. Years later, when Victoria Farrow passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, Katherine held his hand and whispered words of love and gratitude. She mourned him deeply, as one mourns the loss of half their soul, but she did not regret a single moment of their life together. Katherine lived another 4 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her, telling stories of the grandfather who had kept his promises and the love that had defined 2 lives. When she finally joined Victoria, it was with a smile on her face and his name on her lips. They were buried side by side in the Lovelock cemetery under a shared headstone that read simply, "Victoria and Katherine Farrow, together in life, together in eternity." And below that, the words that had started it all, "No one hurts you again." The Broken Spur Ranch continued through generations of Farrows, each one carrying forward the legacy of love and dedication that Victoria and Katherine had established. The house still stood, expanded and modernized over the years, but retaining its essential character. And on warm summer evenings, if you listened carefully, some claimed you could still hear the echo of laughter from that first year, when 2 wounded souls found each other and built something lasting from the ashes of their pasts. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived in a snowstorm with a black eye, and the cowboy who promised to protect her, became legend in Lovelock. Parents told it to their children as an example of how love could heal even the deepest wounds. Young couples invoked it as proof that second chances existed for those brave enough to seize them. And anyone who had witnessed Victoria and Catherine's devotion to each other over those 3 decades knew that sometimes, against all odds, two people find exactly what they need in each other. Their love story was not perfect, no real love story ever is. There were arguments and misunderstandings, challenges and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, they had each other. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.